you go.
Okay, folks. Well, thank you for joining. This is the committee meeting of the drafting committee of the Human Rights Commission. We're working on the ordinance. There's 3 of us present. We're waiting on 1 more committee member, but we'll just launch now. There's no members of the public present. Chiefly, really, the agenda for this meeting should be very slim. And it's really just to figure out if any of the other commission members want to interlineate any additional comments on the working draft that we have, okay? And again, our goal when we get to our April meeting is to socialize with the rest of the commission what we want to submit to the board, okay? We can submit the product that we have developed right now, which hasn't gone all the way through county attorney's review, and we still need to do that process, and that's going to take longer. Or we can bifurcate what we think are the highest priority items from this document, and we can submit it to the board for approval while we have a longer ramp and path to continue doing what we're doing with the county attorney's office. Okay, so that's going to be teed up to the broader commission in April, and that tracks the email that I sent. We're trying to socialize what approach we want to do, but this group can work on the one approach where we would do all of our changes and get it submitted to the county attorney's office. Okay. And so I think, Stephen, you and I have marked it up. I have, oh, sorry, there's a bit of an echo. Do you guys mind going on mute? There you go. All right. So what I have done is I have taken the 2020 version of the ordinance. I've had it scanned into Word, and I have migrated over all of the changes that the original drafting committee made, as well as the recommended changes that we discussed with the county attorney in last summer, as well as the responsive changes that Stephen made to the county attorney's recommended changes, as well as some of the items, Stephen, that you and I talked about after the last county attorney committee, or the last county attorney attended committee meeting. Okay, so what you have now in track changes in that Word document is the current version of the ordinance in a clean document that has cut down all of the version control issues that we have had with this document for the past 8 months. And it sounds to me like, Carol, you have some additional edits that you want to make on top of that to the definitions. So my recommendation would be send them over. We can look at them. And then we can, if we like, get this version of the document with county attorney so that at least that work stream is ongoing. That doesn't preclude us in April from deciding whether we want to bifurcate and we want to do, priority item number 1, priority item 1, 2, 3, or all of it to be submitted up to the board. So that's my agenda. That's what I think we need to talk about today, but I'll turn it over to you guys.
That works for me.
Okay, Carol? Carol, it looks like you might be on mute. Carol, if you can still hear us, you might be still on mute, and I don't know if I have the ability to, let me see if I can unmute.
I had too many tabs open, so I couldn't find the Teams tab.
No worries.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I want to thank you for sending out this version. I can see a lot of work's been done to it, some additional very thoughtful things. The comments I have, there's nothing really earth-shattering. It just really has to do with some of the language that I think is important, because I see that things like definitions of physical impairment, mental impairment are taken out. And I think it's important that we have the legal definitions in there so that if someone is looking to see, am I covered by the ordinance, that they know whether or not they're covered. So the changes that I made that you're not able to see had mainly to do with that. And then also there's a different definition for what's illegal in employment for age discrimination is over the age of 40. we don't define elderliness, which is has a legal definition under the Virginia Code, which has a different age than the age discrimination. So I thought it would be helpful to clarify those. So nothing really earth-shattering. Then I questioned why throughout the document the protected attributes is capitalized where the other terms are not. I didn't know if there was a reason for that. So actually, let me ask Steve, because I know that was something that you had put into the code. Is there a reason that's capitalized throughout the ordinance, or is that just kind of a housekeeping?
I think it's a defined term, right, Stephen? We have it in our definitions, and I'm happy to share screen so we can look at that.
Right, right. But we have other terms that are defined and nothing else is capitalized. So that's why I was questioning why that was just.
I think it was capitalized because it's maybe a bit of an unusual defined term. And so we don't want anyone to sort of look at it and be like, okay, protected attribute. Well, what does that mean? Oh, well, it's capitalized. You go check definitions and find out.
Sure. So I can go through the comments. Steve, were you able to see my comments in the document I sent you?
Yeah, you just sent me the Word version, so I'm going to forward it to the group right now.
Okay.
So Carol, in terms of mental impairment, are you espousing we keep this kind of antiquated definition with mental retardation, autism, and the like?
No, there's a more modern definition. So I'm absolutely in favor of modernizing it. I would just like to see it more in line with either what's currently being used, you know, by the community or the Virginia code terms, just so that it's,
yeah,
you know, just so that people knows what it is. So for example, mental impairment, the Virginia code, and that was one of my comments. I just cut and pasted what was in 51.5-40.1. Mental impairment means a disability attributable to intellectual disability, autism, any other neurologically handicapping condition closely related to intellectual disability. It's a rather long definition, but it is more modern. So yeah, I'm not in favor of keeping stuff that that doesn't sound right in today's parlance.
Yeah, I guess the only question I have, and Stephen, you know, welcome your thoughts on this as well. But I think that definition, that Virginia Code definition, is a bit limiting, right? Because I think if you look at the way the, like, say, the EEOC, for example, or the ADA would define mental impairment, would just look at any impairment like what I have highlighted on the screen here, that inhibits a major life activity, and it doesn't limit it to intellectual disabilities or some of that other definition. So I actually thought it was broader in not doing that, but I defer to you guys on the original drafting committee here.
Well, I see it stricken, Helen, so I'm not sure if we're looking at the same thing. The version I have, it's the language is stricken.
This is the antiquated version that was in here that limited it to things like mental retardation and autism, right? We have stricken that, agreed. We're aligned there. But then pulling in the definition of mental impairment from Virginia Code 50.1 whatever, in my view, that lengthy definition is actually not super modern. I think the super modern way in which one can reference a mental impairment is just like what is here. It's a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity without endeavoring to put a narrow universe of what is a mental impairment. Because I think in the law, there's broader scope for that to pick up a lot of things outside of intellectual disabilities, autism, and the like. That's set forth in 50.1 whatever. But again, defer to you guys on whether you want to say this is what it includes, as opposed to it includes everything, right? That otherwise meets the general rule, except for active drug use and active alcoholism or whatever, or not. No, not active alcoholism and current drug addiction, which is also the carve out.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm fine with that. I'm just not seeing where you have it defined in here. So what am I missing?
It is, in other words, it's not defined. It's either a physical or mental impairment that. And so the test is it something that inhibits a major life activity?
Okay.
And if so, could it constitute a mental impairment if we don't define that universe from 50.1 whatever? We have a broader scope, if you're tracking me. And we're saying it's everything that otherwise fits this definition of disability, could be physical or could be mental, except not this. Stephen, do you have a view on that?
I agree with you. I mean, I think that the broader definition is what we should be striving for, and we have.
I'm fine with that, because actually in reviewing the Virginia code where it talks about things like service animals, I think we would want to be broader actually. So I'm not really trying to be more restrictive. I was just trying to clarify, but if that's the intent, that's fine. I would imagine that people who consider themselves a person with a disability or who perceive themselves to be a person with disability, that they would know what attribute they had that they felt they were being discriminated against. So so thank you. I was just trying to clarify that.
Good.
And then that also gets to the point further down. I was talking about perceived to be disabled, because I know that's been a real issue with the county, where people have been sent for fitness for duty examinations that have not even had a disability, and then it was determined that even though they weren't found to have a disability, people felt threatened by their gestures or what have you, and it's just been used as an excuse to terminate people. So I'm not a big fan of fitness for duty examinations. So I just wanted to make sure that was included in there, that people do have a right to file if it's only because they've been perceived to have a disability.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. So do we have perception? I mean, I think the law is clear that it's based upon an actual or perceived disability, but I guess the question is, where would we say that?
So now looking back at what's in here, where it says is regarded as having a physical and mental impairment,
that's where it is.
So I think that's
so it's
okay.
covered.
I think that captures my concern.
Okay. So we're good there. So it sounds like, Carol, you're good without specifically defining mental impairment or physical impairment. You're good with the capital P, capital A protected attribute. We've got perception covered here in point 2.
Do you want me to keep going? Because it sounds like you and Steve have already spoken offline or ongoingly, I should say ongoing, not offline, about some of these things. So, and then it kind of gets back to, and Steve, I raised this before on the source of funds. I did find a definition that said it wasn't Virginia definition that said source of funds mean any source that lawfully provides funds. I'm just a little bit concerned the way it's written, where it just says source of funds, where someone could interpret it to say, well, I'm a drug dealer, I run a prostitution ring or what have you, and now my landlord has to rent to me because your code says source of funds. I know that's kind of an outlier. That's probably
I think that's a really good point, right? Because in other words, it can create pockets of opportunism, and it's not a protected. It's not in what we're intending to cover. If you have a definition of that, I think it's worth us looking and including that in the definitions.
Yeah, so I'll just read it, choose for the record. So I found this on Law Insider, and it says source of funds means any source that lawfully provides funds to or on behalf of a renter or buyer of housing, including any assistance, benefit, or subsidy program, whether such program is administered by a government or non-governmental entity. To me, I found that pretty broad. Steve, you're an expert in this area, and you may have, something else that you want to include. I just want to make it clear in the ordinance that we're talking about legal source of funds.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that definition. I think it's fine. But the only concern I have, based on what you read, Carol, is that I think it limits it only to issues of renting. And I don't remember if the most current version of what we're doing includes source of funds and other things besides rental issues.
Sure. And I mean, and we can tweak it to our benefit. I just think it's important to say, I mean, even if we want to be broad, like with disability, and just say legal source of funds, without getting into the particulars, I think that would cover my concern.
Yeah, that's fine too.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that. So that would basically, just so I'm tracking, that would basically mean in each reference to source of funds, we would precede it with legal source of funds, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think that works. Do we have a preference? I mean, it might be easier if we just pop it in the definition, so we only change it in one place.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, okay. All right, so we'll add that to the definition. Okay. Carol, can we go back on your point on elderliness? I now have a copy
Yes.
of your changes. In fact, should I maybe share screen on that one? So we're all looking at the same thing.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, I think that's kind of like my last point, actually, looking at it, where it's helpful to say elderliness is a term that's used for housing. I saw that in the code. Age discrimination is something that's used in employment. Obviously, we want it to be broader than that. We don't want people discriminated for age for other situations, like where they're seated in a restaurant or things like that. So there really isn't a consistent, definition of age, elderliness, or what have you. I mean, if you look for a senior discount, for example, there are multiple definitions of seniors. So I don't know how we want to handle it, but at least for those two areas where there is specificity in terms of what someone's legally required to do, where elderliness means over 55 and employment means over 40, that I think it would be helpful to add some defining language in there.
One thought on that, and let me pull out the housing piece for the second and pin it, right? When I was going through this in the last iteration, where we originally had discrimination on the basis of age, sorry, I'm going to try to jump to where that is for persons over the age of 40. I struck that. Can you all see that on the screen here? I struck that because there are a lot of other progressive, both statutes at the state level and ordinances in other places that contemplate age discrimination as potentially going in two directions, right? It's yes, more commonly in persons over the age of 40, but it can be persons under the age of 40 in some situations. It can be persons over the age of, it can be persons who are over the age of 40, but the discrimination exists by persons over the age of 40 towards people older than that. And so I thought it was unnecessarily limiting, particularly with reference to some of those other statutory provisions, to say that age discrimination only applies to persons at least 40 years or older, right? Because I think it cuts out the inverted discrimination, which can happen. Now that's a separate inquiry on the elderliness definition that you're talking about, which applies in the housing context. And I confess I'm not up to speed on that. And there might be a separate basis for why we want to include that. But does our ordinance get into elderliness? It does.
It does.
Yeah, in housing here.
So, but the thing with the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, there's certain requirements that the employer has to follow if the person who is filing a complaint is over the age of 40. So that's where it makes a difference, Helen. They have to be, told of their choice of avenues to pursue. And if someone comes before us and they appeal the case, can it go before the EEOC? That was my understanding.
So the ADEA has certain requirements that go into separation agreements for persons who are over the age of 40. And that has to do with certain consideration periods and revocation rights and disclosure obligations in connection with a RIF. But the test for that is whether the person is over 40 or not, and that's certain informational rights. It doesn't necessarily, well, the ADEA is really only limited to persons under 40. For the other statutes that we're talking about, like the perfect example is the New Jersey law against discrimination. It doesn't separately parse what New Jersey law you must, what New Jersey dictated requirements you must comply with for purposes of separation agreements or complaint obligations. And so my thinking is we go broad on that and say discrimination on the basis of age in any direction is a problem from an employment perspective. Now, I think we can separately define elderliness to track to the Virginia code that you're talking about. But I think we do better and we're broader on the age piece.
So ADEA doesn't just apply to separation agreements, it also applies to hiring.
No.
So we're basically saying anybody of any age could file a complaint that if they're not hired based on their age, that someone older than them was hired, because that's what I'm hearing. So that's what I have a problem with. How
Right,
are we?
But if they do not meet the basic qualifications because they don't have sufficient experience, they don't have a claim. But if they're equal, if their applicants are otherwise equal in all respects, and the concern is that you didn't hire me because I'm younger, you hired somebody else who was older, that could potentially create a claim. But I think it's more germane in a hostile work environment case, right? Let's say you have a workforce where everybody is, males over the age of 50. And there is a younger male employee who feels like he's being hazed or mistreated on account of his age. And he's suffering through, slights and slurs based upon his age. I think under the New Jersey law against discrimination, there is a cognizable hostile work environment claim there, right? And so I'm less worried about it from a hiring perspective, where I think there are differentiators, which wouldn't force the hand of an employer, and more so from, a hostility harassment perspective.
Okay, I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on that one, because I think it's important in employment that because there is a lot of discrimination of older people who apply for jobs and people are hired, and a lot of it has to do with they don't want to pay people more money for their experience, but it's not something I want to fall on my sword for. I'm much more interested in the changes that we make to the disability.
Look, I can go either way, and I think we can sort of tee it up, and I think we still have some bracketed items in here for decision, right? We still have, I think, a bracket around political affiliation, and I think you make a good point. I mean, that's my bread and butter, right? Is dealing with age discrimination every day and seeing how that, manifests itself in terminations where people are selected because they are pension eligible or retirement eligible. I know exactly what that looks like. So
yeah, sure.
I mean, you persuade me on that point for sure. And I think in limiting it to 40, we are saying that we think there's a bigger issue with ageism going in that direction. But it is narrower, right, than what I think other ordinances around the country do when it comes to age discrimination. So that becomes, I'm not espousing of one way or another. I'm just saying there's kind of two ways to look at it, and what do we want to prioritize? So Stephen, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, isn't there a way to do this where we can capture both the age discrimination for the older generation and discrimination against the younger generation as well?
Yeah, I mean, it could be that we have elderliness is a listed protected attribute in this section here, right? This is in housing.
Right.
I don't think we have it in employment, right? Here it is, elderliness.
Yeah, it shows up in housing. B, C, D, E, F, H, but it's in brokerage services too.
Yeah, but that's sort of housing adjacent, right?
Just looking to see if it shows up anywhere else.
Housing accommodation.
I think it's the only place I saw it was under housing.
Okay, so I think to Stephen's point, how we could do it, right, to go both ways, is we could say discrimination on the basis of age. That goes in both directions. We're not limiting that to persons over 40, or discrimination on the basis of elderliness, which tracks to the definition in housing, which is, Carol, you said it's 55 and older for housing purposes?
Right, that's what it's in Virginia code, what I saw in Virginia code.
So in other words, we expand protected characteristics for purposes of employment to elderliness. So then you got coverage on all fronts.
Well, no, though, because somebody over 40 has a right under ADEA, and they shouldn't feel like they have to be 55 to have that coverage under employment. So that
Correct,
makes
but they
it
still have it
narrower.
under age, right? If the person over the age of 40
Mhm.
feels like they are passed over in hiring, feels
Mhm.
like they are terminated, feels like they are discriminated against on the basis of age in
Right.
respect to people who are younger than them, they still have an
Right.
avenue under our ordinance to select the age box, right? But so
Correct.
too does somebody who's in their 20s in the example that I gave, right? If they think that they have been subjected to hostile work environment on account of their age, right? But separate and apart from that, we have age as an all-encompassing landing pad.
Mhm.
And then in addition, we have elderliness, which tracks to the housing definition. So if you are over the age, let's say you're 60, you can say it's on the basis of age and on the basis of elderliness. So you'd have two
Okay.
separate bases.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, that's fine.
So, okay, so Stephen, I mean, what is your take on it? Do we keep the deletion of age discrimination only applies to persons over 40 and add elderliness? Or do we just define elderliness and strike that deletion?
I would define elderliness and keep the deletion.
Keep the deletion and define elderliness and put elderliness in the employment context as well?
Yeah, I mean, make it as broad as possible.
Okay. And define it. Okay. All right, Carol, you want to keep going?
Yeah, so I think that's pretty much coming to the end. I talked about we just talked about elderliness. We already talked about the perceived disability that that's kind of covered, regarded as having a disability, the same definition. And then we had talked earlier about the protected attribute, and I think that was my last comment there. But I'm not seeing the changes, and maybe I missed them. I'm not seeing the changes that Whitney was looking for us to add.
Schools.
Yeah.
I'll
So it's
show
just
you.
the word schools, or I'm
No.
just kind of.
No, here, you see where I am? There was a deletion in educational institution.
Oh, okay.
Did not include public schools, colleges, or universities. We struck that. In striking
Okay.
that, public schools, colleges, and universities are covered.
Okay, super. Okay, so that was it, just that one line?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
All right, so let me recap where we landed on this call. So we're going to add a definition of source of funds, and Carol, you're going to email to us that definition that you read, that lawful source of funds language, which I thought sounded pretty good. One, we're going to add that in the definition section. Two, we're going to add a definition of elderliness that tracks from the Virginia Code. And Carol, can you send that one to us? Carol, did we lose you? Okay, so I'll just keep going, Stephen, for us. So we add elderliness definition. We add elderliness as a protected attribute in the employment sections. We add source of funds in the definition. And that's it, right?
Yeah, I had one question about the education definition, though, in response to Carol's question.
Yep.
By the way it reads now, so the way it reads now is that it includes everything public.
Yeah, so maybe this should be public and private.
Yeah, I mean, it does say including private. Yeah, I would say public and private.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I was doing this, Carol, are you back?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got bumped out.
Okay, no worries. So we were just going through the recapping the edits, right? So we're going to add the source of funds definition that you read to us. We're going to add the elderliness definition, Carol, that you referenced. In the employment sections, we're going to add elderliness as a separate protected bases. And then Stephen and I were just looking at educational institution now, and we were grappling with public and private schools. And Stephen, what I was just about to tell you is what I was anchoring on when I was trying to modify this per Whitney's comments, was that the carve out only included public schools, colleges, and universities, which implied that private schools were always covered. But you're right. I mean, no harm in calling that out for total avoidance of doubt, right?
Well, especially because we're calling out, because before it called nothing out. It just said everything's included except for public, schools, colleges, universities. But now if we're gonna call out public school and then say including public colleges, including public universities, we should probably also just say private too.
Yep,
And so,
totally agree.
Okay.
Totally agree. I think that makes perfect sense. Okay, so Carol, can you send to me the two definitions that you referenced? I will incorporate those in the live document, and I will do an incremental red line, which I will send back to this group. Whitney, hello, we have you on.
Helen, you should have those definitions in my comments because I did write them in the comments.
Are they okay? I just got your comments in real time. Are they written out, or are they just in a comment bubble? Okay.
Well, they're in the comment bubble.
Okay, but is the actual definition of elderliness in your comment, or are you just referencing it?
So. If not, I'll go back and double check and send it to you.
Yeah, if you could just, because I don't see the definition itself. Okay. I see the reference to the concept, but if you have it handy, and it will just make it a lot easier for me than to have to go and find it. Sure. Same point on that source of funds definition that you read at the outset. Whitney, thank you so much for joining. And I know you've got a busy day, so let me just give you a quick overview of where we landed and make sure, yes, Whitney, from your perspective, there's not anything else we need to be doing on this ordinance. Okay. So top line from a process perspective. All right. What we're going to do in April as a commission is align on approach of what we are going to send to the board. Okay. And the approach could be we send the whole ball of wax up to the board, knowing that we don't have full county attorney's office approval, and they're likely to create cycles for us, but it would be to send everything and hope it all gets approved fast. Option one. Option two, we list our highest priority right now, which from a timing perspective, not a substantive perspective, but from a timing perspective, Whitney, is the public schools being encompassed jurisdictionally in the scope of the ordinance. So we just do a very, very slim red line to the board and say, approve this for 2023. We're still working diligently with the county attorney's office on everything else we want to do. And we're wordsmithing, but that's going to take time, but we can't wait on that for public schools to be covered. So that's option two, just schools. Okay. Option three is we come up with our punch list of our, maybe 1, 2, 3 highest priorities and send a slightly heavier red line to the county board, and then and reserve our ability to do all of the rest with the county attorney in a parallel track, which maybe will be a 2024 endeavor. Okay. So that's what we're going to tee up and vote on before the commission in April. What this group is trying to do is, with respect to option one, the whole ball of wax, is to align internally on what we want that to be. And so where we landed, and Carol provided her feedback on the existing ordinance. So what we landed on, Whitney, is we're going to define source of funds to be clear that we're only talking about lawfully obtained sources of funds, so that we're not creating a pocket of opportunism there. Okay, one. Two, yes. Okay. We're going to define the term elderliness so that it tracks to the Virginia Code definition. And then we're going to include elderliness as an additional and separate basis alongside of age for purposes of employment related claims. Okay. And then three, in the edits we've already made to have the jurisdiction extend to public schools in the county, we're going to clarify we mean both public and private schools. Arguably, private schools were always covered, but we're just going to gild that lily and make it crystal clear and say public and private. So those are the three additional changes that we walked away with from this drafting session, beyond what was in the markup that I circulated a couple weeks ago. So from your perspective, Whitney, given your work streams over on the education side, does that cover your concerns and what you're working on?
It does. And what I can do is I have 4 different, actually I might be meeting in the next few weeks. I'm actually meeting with all of the board members. So I can actually sort of ask them. I can say, I can kind of not give them the options per se, but get a taste.
Get a line of sight.
Yeah, for what what they're thinking. I mean, if there's enough interest in getting it done now, then we can present it that way. But if not, then oh gosh, sorry, I'm getting like inundated with phone calls and emails and texts. But I think that I would prefer to get as much done as possible.
Yep.
Understanding, but I like the thing and working and letting them know that we can be working with some of these things in conjunction with the county attorney's office.
Yep. Yep. I think that's super helpful, Whitney. And maybe if you can endeavor to get a meeting or two in advance of our next April meeting, so you can maybe give us a readout, right? Because you'll have a unique line of sight on what's likely to be approved. Because clearly, if your sense from your efforts is that the board is ready to go. And by the way, I should tell you guys, I gave testimony on Thursday on the budget committee hearings, Wednesday, Thursday, just sort of tracking what our priorities are. And I used it as an opportunity to say, this is coming with a strident recommendation from the Human Rights Commission that you pass it when it comes. And I previewed all of the things, not just the high priority things, right? And I was pretty strident on it. And I also sort of got a little jab in there about the anti-bullying policy that hasn't yet been approved, but that they have had on their decks for 2 years. So Whitney, I think, they will have heard it from me in a public hearing last week, and then they'll hear it from you. So I'm hoping that's going to put the pressure on. And then maybe you can come to April prepared to tell us, like, look, don't even try it. Like, it's going to be cycles. Let's be really strategic about this and get what we need and do it in pieces, right?
Yep.
Or it's good to go and we'll send it off.
Yes, I will do that. And because I'm doing my own budget stuff with AIM, with my day job, I have meetings with all 5 of them.
Awesome. Okay, that's so great. So then the last question for this crowd is as follows. So I'm going to take these edits that we've talked about. I'm going to mark them in our live document, and I will send to you guys an incremental red line so you can see what I've changed. Then we need to decide, do we want to send, what we approve as the drafting committee here? And I think I have a proxy from Chris. I think Roland is traveling. I don't know if he's going to be able to look at it. So we got to keep it moving. Okay. We need to decide, if we get comfortable with the draft as is, do we send it to the county attorney's office to at least have them look at it? Or do we not and just wait and decide what we're going to do in April? Because we have 3 weeks or so until our meeting. So like, if we get this over to the county attorney's office by midweek this week, that gives them 2.5 weeks to, like, come on, say your piece. Otherwise it's going up. So we can at least present it when we present it as having been vetted through their office.
Can we ask the county attorney's office how long they need to review it?
We can. I think my thinking on that is, with this version of the document where so much of the noise and the red line and the confusion has been stripped away, I'm hoping that but do you know what I mean? Think about the Ginny version, Stephen. Like, we were like pulling our hair out this summer and just trying to track the edits. I think this version is a lot cleaner and a lot easier to see what we're changing. And we have sort of corrected some of the issues, the wordsmithing issues that Ginny raised. So I worry a little bit about going back to Ginny when she has her headspace of the version that went to her over the summer. Whereas I think if she sees this, she'll go, oh, this is a lot easier to do.
Well, we can just send her the version that's not approved.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to decide, this group, if we want to do that. Tactically, do we want to do that? Or do we want to wait until the April meeting?
I think we maybe send it, because the good thing about the schools thing is that I've already talked to each one of the board members about their concern about schools. So they know that that's coming specifically. They understand that the way that our leadership is structured, that there really is no further accountability for Arlington Public Schools outside of Arlington Public Schools. They're looking for an answer to that too. So what I don't want to do, though, is if there's some other things that, even if we have to do it like step by step, if there's some other things that we can like add to it.
Yeah.
I don't want to just say schools, because I think that we're good, but I also don't want to say we'll do it all. So if we already give it to the county attorney, she's already looking at it. By the time, like, my meeting with Christian is the chair, and I don't meet with him until the 30th, which is
of
10
March
days today.
Okay. All right.
So if she already has it and she takes a look, you could even potentially say, hey, what are you thinking about it? And I can even go into my conversation with Kristen being like, county attorney's seen it. She has some issues, but it's not that, you know, so that, and he's highly strategic in terms of his thought, and he's the chair, right? So, and he's also the only one who is an APS parent right now.
Yep. Yep. I like it. Okay. So consequently, we move fast. So let me take the pen on what we talked about. Let me get the incremental to you guys. Just give me a thumbs up on it. Okay. And then I will run a cumulative red line against the existing 2020 ordinance, and I'll distribute it back over to Ginny. Are you guys aligned with that right now? Like as soon as we can this week?
I think so.
Sounds good.
Okay. And I'll press Ginny to your point, Stephen, and I will say, I understand that some of our commission members are going to be meeting with the board members later this month to talk about it. So we wanted to get it in your hands. So that lights a little bit of a fire under her.
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
And I sent you those
guys.
definitions. I sent you those definitions already, Helen, so you should have what you need.
Perfect, Carol. Thank you so much, guys. This has been super productive. Thank you all for the time and the hard work on this. I'll get the incremental to you as soon as I can, and let me know if you see anything else. And I think we can do it over email. Let's just be mindful about not creating a conversation.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, team. Have a great
Thanks.
evening. Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.
Yeah.